Welcome to Digital Thangka Workshop. This is the last-ish video we're going to do on shading our lotus. Last class or last tutorial we finished our shading. We got up to the point where we started looking at the outline. We experimented with a little bit of colouring of the outline, and we mucked around with the shading and looked at some different techniques to try and make our image look as though it was made of light by reversing the shading values. Today's class we're going to look primarily at the line, and the main thing we're going to do is look at three different ways of colouring the line. At the end of last tutorial we looked at a very easy way of colouring the line, and that's where we'll start. I'll just go over that in a little bit more detail, and that's just essentially doing a very basic version of the line, which is in soft light blend mode, and that enables the line to recede into the background, but it still defines the shape of the object. And not only that, it takes on the colour of whatever's behind it. So it's a very quick and easy way of producing a line which is harmonious to the colour that it's placed on top of. So let's cover that first. So here's our line layer. First thing to say is, let's turn it on so we can look at it. So at the moment it's black. We said that black is you really want to avoid black, in my opinion. When we start off, I think I said in a previous tutorial that we rely a lot on the line, and as we get more proficient at shading, we can rely less on the line. Some of the beautiful, very old Chinese styled Tibetan thangkas that I like, that they have very, very subtle line work. It doesn't dominate at all. So that's the style that I like, and it's the style that I try and mimic as best I can. And so that's kind of what I'll try and show you now. So we've got our line. It's sitting there. It's black. The thing to start off with is to make sure that we've now locked the pixels. So this little checkerboard pattern icon, if we turn that on and off, that locks the transparency of the pixels, which means if we go to paint with some colour like pink, then you can only paint the line. If I turn the transparency off, then when I paint everywhere. So the transparency function is very, very handy. So there it is. Once that little chain icon is on, it means that your transparent areas are protected. It's always a good idea, just by the way, when you've got your line work finished, that you lock it anyway, because often you can get confused, or if you do some steps to go backwards in your thangka, you can end up painting on your line by mistake. And if that work goes off your history palette, if you've done more than 30 or so changes, then you've lost your line work. You have to either find it and bring it back in from your original document, or it creates problems. So it's always a good idea to lock your line, because you want to preserve that as best you can, and that'll prevent you from making any changes by mistake. Okay, so soft light blend mode. Let's go up here. Blend modes, soft light. We'll zoom in and take a look at what that's done. So remember, our line is black. So everything that's below it is darkened, but the colour remains consistent with the layer that's below it. So this has now become a very dark green. And this has become a dark yellow. But unfortunately, where our yellow goes to green, there's a huge tonal difference there. So we get this stepped pattern here, and that's what's difficult about the soft light option. Where there's a solid piece of colour underneath it, it works beautifully. Then we can the dominance of the line can be adjusted by our opacity. So if I zoom back out, then you can get a kind of a quick and easy subtle coloured outline. Okay, so that's option one, soft light. So it's really easy to do. And I mean, I actually do use it sometimes when there's areas that aren't particularly important to the Thangka, then and there's certain areas that it works for really well, and other times it won't work at all. You'd never want to use that, for example, on the deity. In some landscape applications it works really well. So let's undo that. Option B, let's look at colouring the line. So with our line locked like that, we can now make this essentially any colour. So it's black at the moment, so let's change colour. Easiest way to do that, in my opinion, is to Command U, which is the shortcut to bring up the hue and saturation dialog box. We'll zoom in a little bit and we'll select this option, Colorize. And it's now just a matter, because our line's black, we won't see anything until we turn up the lightness. So here we're colorizing towards red, as you can see, and that's because the hue is selected towards red. And here, if you're going to do just one colored line, you just have to pick the hue, which is complementary to what you're trying to outline. So here we've got a lot of different colors, so we're not going to be able to pick just one. But if you choose anything that's really unsaturated, it'll kind of work. So that kind of produces an outline. So that's another option. The next option we'll look at is to actually colour the line with each section individually. And this is what I end up doing pretty much for the entire Thangka. So you can save yourself some work by selecting a line colour that is consistent with or is complementary to the majority of your image, and then you've just got to colour the sections where it's clashing. So here, for example, I think you could probably safely say the majority of the image is green, so we'll try and save ourselves some time by setting our hue to some kind of green, getting our lightness value happening, and then just our saturation. So we don't want it too saturated. Something fairly muddy, I would be thinking. Okay. Then all it's a matter of doing is picking up the colour that's next to your line and painting the line so that it's complementary to your other sections. So let's take a look at doing that quickly, and then I'll speed up and you can see me do the whole picture. So let's come in here to this pink section. We definitely don't want a sort of a green line here in this pink. So with our brush selected, you pretty much generally want a hard brush for the beginning of this. So shift right square bracket, and let's just have a bit of a paint there. Okay. So that's not too bad. It works in this section here, but it wants to be much darker here. So it's going to require some refinement, and I'll do all of that when we speed up the video. Up here at the top, it's working nicely. Incidentally, you don't have to choose pink for this section. You could choose blue because it borders on blue. So with the brush tool selected, you can press down Alt, and that'll bring up the color picker. You can move it around to pick up the color you want, and you can make that line blue. Like that. So it's up to you to choose, where lines begin and end. And pick your colors. And here we can have this line taper a little bit. So you can make it look very refined. So I've just got that coming to a nice point there. And of course the darkness of this line that you're choosing, the tonal range of that line, should be complementary to your the efforts that you've made in shading. So there's just a little bit of work. I'll speed up from here and you can watch me do the entire thing quickly, and then we'll take a look at what we've done. Okay, so there we have it. There's our coloured line. I did that pretty quickly, and as you can see, it was a fair bit of work. There's a lot to work out to get the line so it's consistently shading both a dark area and a light area. Again, I recommend that you take more time and more care than I just did, but you know, I can't have the video go for too long. So I think that's pretty much it. From here, I mean, the only thing to warn you against is it's very, this is kind of a very difficult to edit process. So if you decide to change the underlying colour of a lotus petal at this stage, or you find that you want the line darker or lighter in certain areas, then you have to really do it by hand. So you really, colouring the line is almost the last thing I do when everything's sort of set in stone and I'm happy with the values. I've checked everything and I'm happy with both the colour and the tonality of the image. Then I'll colour the line, because you don't want to have to repaint every time you make a little bit of a change. There's also another, you know, from here you can make minor adjustments to opacity without affecting too much. So if you want your line to be less, you can make it more subtle. And of course, all of this depends on, all the way in the first tutorial, we paid a lot of attention to make sure that there weren't any uncoloured sections underneath any holes in our drawing. That'll be obvious if I turn on the white layer. So you can see areas here which are uncoloured. And if I turn on the line above that, and I want to reduce the opacity, then those little white bits are going to show through. So if we paid really good care and good attention to making sure we minimise this. You never get it out completely, but you just have to minimise it. And then the idea of that is it gives you many more options as you come to the line section in terms of you know, the opacity of that line. Okay, so that was line version, what was it, line version 3. Final version of the line I'm going to give you is just a basic gold. So one of our goals is to achieve a outline which is going to enable us to add our lotus to the reference image, just to sort of demonstrate the way we can do digital restoration. So we need to do that, we need to produce a line which is stylistically the same as the one the artist has chosen. So this is all gold, and our line needs to be as close to that as we can get it, both in colour, but secondly needs to be texture. If you just add a line that's that colour, which I can do for you, I'll just drag that down. Whoa, don't want to do that. I want to duplicate it. So if I just pick up that colour, and fill our lines, so it doesn't look anything like a gold outline. I mean, that is the colour that the colour picker is telling us it is, but we don't have any texture. That's the problem. Gold, being a reflective surface, has a lot of highlight value to it, spectral highlight. So what we need to do to get our line looking like it's gold is to add some texture. The second thing you can do, just before I go on, is something I do is you can just add gold. Maybe we'll do that. So this is just a scan of some gold leaf. So that's one thing you can do, and then that's already got this beautiful texture in there. So let's do that, but we'll do our faux gold, or our fake gold outline first. So as I said, the thing that's missing there is texture. There's many ways you can add texture to your line, but I'll just show you a quick and easy way. So down here you can come to effects, And what we'll do is we'll add a pattern overlay. So that's not the pattern we want. So we'll choose a pattern. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, that's getting close. That's too coarse. Let's have a look at that. Don't want that. Let's take a look at that. That's given us the variance we want, but it's totally destroyed our colour. What we need to do is go to our old favourite soft light blend mode. Or we could do overlay if we wanted something stronger. Or you could do perhaps colour burn, or it's too strong. Let's stick with overlay. You could experiment with this. And then we just have to dial down the opacity of that until we get the variation we're looking for. So something like that. We'll change the colour of the line. So at the moment it needs to be more saturated to be consistent with the bottom image. And we can make it perhaps a little bit darker. So there we have a kind of a fake gold. And if I add our texture, oh, we don't have a texture yet, and we'll do that in the next video. If I were to add a texture, that would integrate these this restored section from the original section. So that's line version 4 or 3, I can't remember. That's what it looks like. So gold is complementary to pretty much any colour you add, and that's why gold outline works so well. So gold will unify the entire colour palette that you've got there. Let's take a look at our last version, which is real gold, or as close to real gold as we can get it. So let's go back across the bridge. We'll open that. And then we'll just drag it on by holding down Command, which gives us temporarily accesses the move tool. It doesn't matter. There's our gold. So just to make life easy, we'll just resize that so that it's covering our picture. Then it's just a very simple matter of taking our line and what we want to do is, I'll just turn that off a minute so you can see. What we're hoping to do is we just need to select the line. So you can hold, in the same way as you select in a channel, you can hold down the Command or the Control key and click on the line layer, and that will turn everything that is a non-transparent pixel or an opaque pixel into your selection. You click in this little section here, this little square preview of what's on that layer, and you can see the cursor comes up into a little marquee icon. So move it in there, click, and then it creates a selection out of your outline. Then all we have to do, and I'll hide that selection so we can, it's not in the way, so it's still active, it's just hidden. With our gold layer turned on, we just add a mask with the selection active, and it will make all the pixels transparent that aren't in that selection. It just leaves you with the gold outline. So that's obviously a very easy way of getting a realistic gold finish. If we integrate that to our background image, you can see that it's it's way out in terms of saturation and colour. But if we want to make that more colour consistent, we just bring up our Command U dialog box, which is hue and saturation, and then it's just a matter of trying to, if our goal is to make it match that, is to bring our saturation down and its lightness value up probably a little bit. And then it would also need, if you were doing it to match this, it would also need blurring so that it matches this out of focus photograph that we're trying to reproduce against. Okay, so they're all the versions for our outline. So we had a basic coloured line, we had an overlay line, we had a fake gold, we had a real gold, and then we had, of course, our line, which is based on the colour values that are below it. Okay, so the next step is to add some texture to our image. We're trying to reproduce a traditionally painted look, so let's take a look at a couple of options that we can use to add some variation to our colour and get things looking as though they're painted by hand and not digitally. So the first thing to do is probably to recognise the problem. The problem is that we have these areas which, although they're shaded, have no variation that you would see in a hand-painted image. So there'd be lots of minor variation in here in terms of there'd be little bits of brush stroking and you know, little areas which were darker, lighter, and then of course there'd be a little bit of canvas texture showing through. So the first thing we're going to do is add that canvas texture. So I have this is my go-to canvas texture, and it's just an image that I created out of a Thangka which was very minimally painted. There were areas, say, in here that were painted with some landscape imagery, and then Mahasiddha here, and then huge areas left blank by the artist, literally blank, so the canvas showed through completely. So it's very beautiful Thangka, and it enabled me to create this this texture. So we'll add that to our picture. And let's take a look at the way we're going to use it. One thing to say about your texture is it needs to be scaled correctly. So you're going to have to, I may do a brief tutorial on that, but depending on your output print size, your canvas texture needs to be consistent with that. So for how many fabric threads there are per inch, that needs to be consistent with the size that you're actually going to print at. Otherwise it's going to look like it's painted on some kind of incredibly fine silk, or it may even be too coarse, look like it's been painted on Hessian, for example. So just something to be aware of. We'll just resize that, Command T. And so at the moment that's not being a texture at all. So back to our standby blend mode, which is soft light. So soft light now enables it to be superimposed on the image. So straight up we've got two problems. The first problem is that it's the wrong color. So soft light is adding this the color as well as the shading values. So what we need to do is we need to adjust both the color and the brightness or the darkness of this so that it doesn't affect our image adversely. It needs to be subtle. So what I'll do is I'll drag it halfway across. Okay. So you can see the edge of the texture there. We want to get all the color value out of that. So Command U brings up hue and saturation. And it's just a matter of adjusting the saturation so that it's 0 or minus 100% in this case. Then the second problem we're having is that the canvas is actually lighter than mid-grey. So in soft light blend mode, mid-grey has no effect on what's below it. But in this case it's lighter than mid-grey, so it's lightening everything that's below it. So we just need to get the lightness value down so that it's not creating problems for us. So you'll never get it exactly right because the idea of it is that it brightens and darkens, but it just needs to be, yeah, so that's about right. So I'm just using the arrow keys just to get it subtle here. So too dark, too light, just about right, I reckon. Then it's just a matter of selecting the opacity and bringing it down to however strong you want that texture to affect your image. So perhaps something like that. As I said, when you're working on a finished image, you're going to want the texture to affect different areas differently depending on the amount of paint that the artist would have laid down, and that's just a matter of changing the opacity in different areas. So you get some nice subtlety to what you're doing. So if we go back into our green petal there, we can see that straight away we've got good colour value there. That's one method. Okay, I'll turn that off so we don't have to see it. The second method I'm going to show you is to add noise. So some digital artists I know add noise at almost every step they do. And what that does is that starts breaking up these areas and starts introducing that beautiful variance to the coloured areas. I always just add noise in one step. It's probably the last thing I do. So we need our colour layer selected. So everything, all our colours on one layer, so we can do this all in one go. And then we've got filter, noise, add noise, and there's our noise come up. So noise is like a very uniform texture, I guess you could call it. One thing you need to check, you want to have monochromatic selected here. If you've got that unselected, then you get this, horrible sort of purpley, old school digital camera noise. You want monochromatic. Gaussian or uniform, doesn't matter, one affects it more than the other. And then just depending on the scale that your image is going to be viewed at, you just bring the value up. It's hard to select these with a pen because it's not the finest tool. Noise is a very handy thing to have at hand. Sometimes if you make a lot of variation to an area that has shading, such as the sky, you get what's called banding, and the banding is very hard to remove and it looks terrible. One of the ways you can remove it is with noise. I'm going to go for 3% there, I reckon. No, I'm not. 3. Yeah, about 3. And there we've got our noise. We add our texture. Then if we superimpose, so now you can see we're getting close to having a consistent a conformity between our restored section and our original photograph that we were working from. That's not looking too bad. I think that's the last thing I'm going to cover. I think what I'll do is we'll go to the next tutorial, which is going to be about creating a restored image. I think I want to keep this tutorial just so that it's dealing with just doing the lotus. So I think we've signed off on our lotus. We've done a really nice job. We've done the first step or the groundwork really to paint essentially anything. So now if you want to add a deity to the top of that or some landscape features, it's exactly the same process. You don't have to do anything different much, I don't think. It's just a matter of following all those steps and you'll be able to make the picture as complex or as simple as you like. So I think that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this series and I hope you get something out of it. And as I said, it's a beautiful and wonderful practice, and it's really, I often think that if you do sadhana practice, for example, if you paint a picture of Manjushri, for example, it can be the equivalent of doing a 1-month retreat, mantra retreat, Manjushri. You reach the deities in a very profound way by painting them. So it's a very beautiful and holy practice. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next video.